Hey guys, this is the first video in a series where we are going to look at how to play every possible interval pattern in a given key. Not in just one key, but in any key in music. And you're gonna find out through this video series that it's actually super simple to do. Now, if we pause here for a moment, and if I were to time travel back and say that to myself when I first started playing music, I would have said one of two things. One, that's a straight up lie. That's impossible, because how could you, in a matter of minutes, figure out how to play every possible interval pattern on the guitar? It just seemed like that wasn't possible. Or I would have said, that's magic. That maybe it's possible, but it involves something supernatural involved. But as you're gonna find out, it is actually super simple, and because we're gonna use a special trick to help us out, and that is to use color, and specifically the geometry of color, to understand the geometry of music, because both sets of symbols, color and music, actually follow the same exact patterns. Both of them are symmetrical and consistent as you get into these patterns. Now, in another video series, I explained the fretboard geometry and how really you can distill the interval patterns of music down to 6 basic patterns. And using the colors, you can see how these patterns are symmetrical and consistent in an unexpected and beautiful way. Just 6 patterns that you can use to unlock the guitar and find that it's not so mysterious, but really just geometry on steroids. Now, in the fretboard geometry series, I go into way more detail into how all of these intervals work and how they're simple and symmetrical across all 12 keys. But the gist of how they work is this. In every key, like in the key of C, for example, where C is the red square, interval 1, or C in this example, is called the tonic. And the interval that's directly across from it in the chromatic scale is interval sharp 4/flat 5, also known as the tritone. And using color, it's easy to see how this interval is related to the tonic because it's the tonic's complementary color. Intervals 1 and sharp 4/flat 5 are polar opposites. Straddling the tritone are intervals 4 and 5 on either side. These two intervals are also symmetrical around the tonic, interval 1. Also known as the subdominant and dominant respectively, intervals 4 and 5 are closely related to the tonic 1 because of their close connection to the tonic in the circle of fifths. And I explain this special relationship between the circle of fifths and the chromatic scale, that they're really just rearranged versions of each other, in this video. Combined, all of the subdominants and dominants in every key form a kind of star pattern. Then on either side of these intervals are the 3 and flat 6 in any key, also known as the major third and minor sixths, that together form a perfect triangle with the tonic, interval 1. And flanking these two intervals on either side are intervals flat 3 and 6, also known as the minor third and major sixth, which together form a square of intersecting tritones between the tonic, the tritone, the minor third, and the major sixth. Then on either side of those intervals are the major second and minor seventh. These two intervals, like all the others, are evenly spaced around the tonic, interval 1. And in the chromatic scale, in any key, these two intervals are part of 2 interlocking hexagons of whole step intervals. One set is shown here as a pattern of squares, all spaced at whole step intervals, and another of all circles, also spaced at a distance of whole step intervals from each other. And lastly, on either side of the tonic, interval 1, are the minor second and major seventh, which are segments of a dodecagon, also known as the chromatic scale. So really, that's essentially what music is. It's just geometry on steroids. And using color, the underlying patterns of color perfectly mirror the geometry of the scale degrees or intervals in music. So they're like 2 languages that tell the same story. Color and music are the same. One is visible and the other is audible, and you can use the visible nature of color to understand the otherwise invisible patterns of music. Now, in the fretboard geometry series, we picked apart these patterns, these symmetrical geometric patterns, and we applied them to the guitar fretboard so that we could really understand the layout of these patterns and not just look at them, but hear them and play them on the fretboard. And we saw that because they're symmetrical, they apply in the same way across all 12 keys. By looking at these interval patterns one at a time, it kind of helps you understand how they work individually without trying to combine them all at once. In the same way that learning the different moves that are available in the game of chess by seeing how you can move a piece across the board one at a time helps you kind of pace yourself in understanding how all the different pieces move individually, so that once you understand how they work, you can combine them all into one composite mental image to really play the game well. That's in essence what we did in the fretboard geometry series, looking at these intervals one at a time, the patterns they create that guide you as you move across the fretboard as if it was a kind of chessboard. In those videos, we looked at interval 1 in sharp 4/flat 5, the relationship between those intervals, and then we looked at how those intervals appeared in the various keys. Then we looked at intervals 4 and 5 and how they're symmetrical across all keys. Next, we looked at intervals 3 and flat 6 on their own, how they function, and how they apply to all keys, and likewise down the line, focusing on the intervals first and how they're symmetrical across all keys. But now in this video series, we're going to flip it a bit so that we look at all of these interval patterns in the context of a given key, because that's really how musicians play the guitar, is they don't jump across keys. While that's cool, and it's cool to see how all keys are symmetrical and geometric, now we're going to see how these geometric patterns apply in a given key, because that informs how you move across the fretboard, because really all music is typically confined to a given key. Any song typically stays within a given key. So if you're playing in a given key, you want to be able to move across these patterns in that key. So for example, we'll start with the key of C and look at how intervals 1 and sharp 4/flat 5 appear on the fretboard, followed by intervals 4 and 5 in the key of C, then 3 and flat 6 in the key of C, flat 3 and 6, 2 and flat 7, and flat 2 and 7, again all in the key of C. Then we'll move on to the key of G, going through each interval pattern in sequence in that key, and so on. Because again, this is how we actually play the guitar, moving through these various patterns in a given key. And once you know how they work in one key, you essentially know how they work in all 12. But before you just jump into the next video, let's really understand why we're even doing this, because this is admittedly some pretty nerdy stuff to be talking about the geometry of the guitar fretboard and all that. I don't know why that's my nerd voice, but let's really look at it, because why would you get into the weeds this far? Really, if you want to be like most people, you could just pick up the guitar, start to play, memorize a few positions, and you're rocking out. So why would we dive in this deep? Because these interval patterns are what inform every pattern you play. They inform scales. They inform melodies, they inform chords and progressions. Once you understand these interval patterns and they show you how to move from one string or fret to the next, there's an order and a logic and a structure to it. It's not random. When I first started the guitar, it seemed like it was totally random. Like, wow, you know, I see people moving their hand this way, and then suddenly they're moving their hand this way, and it looks like they're just kind of forming these strange random shapes. It's not random. The fingers are guided by these underlying principles, these underlying patterns. So once you understand these underlying patterns, and not just the muscle memory of where to put your finger, but why they're arranged like this, then you start to understand how to build different chords, how to build progressions that follow a logical order. And in essence, that is music theory. And once you understand music theory, you can really start to compose your own music. So you're not just hunting and pecking and randomly finding different notes, but you really understand what you're doing in an informed way. So definitely check out the next videos. Please subscribe and ring the bell for notifications, because there is some good stuff coming your way. And with that said, I will see you in the next video.